In a quiet suburban neighborhood, where manicured lawns stretched as far as the eye could see and white picket fences lined every street, Dr. Emily Carter lived with her 8-year-old daughter, Lily. The house at the end of Maple Lane wasn't just a home. It was a sanctuary for the two of them. Emily worked long hours as a trauma surgeon, saving lives in the emergency room of the local hospital, while Lily spent her days painting colorful pictures that brightened up their walls. Despite the challenges they faced, Lily had cerebral palsy and used a wheelchair. Their bond was unbreakable. They found joy in the little things: laughter over dinner, bedtime stories, and weekend trips to the park. But life in this seemingly perfect suburb wasn't without its complications. The Homeowners Association, HOA, led by Karen Miller, ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist. Karen was infamous for her obsession with rules. From the shade of paint on front doors to the exact placement of garden gnomes, nothing escaped her watchful eye. She patrolled the streets daily, clipboard in hand, ready to issue warnings or fines for even the smallest infractions. To Karen, keeping the neighborhood perfect was more than a duty, it was a mission. Emily tried her best to stay out of Karen's crosshairs. She kept her yard tidy, followed the HOA guidelines, and avoided unnecessary conflict. But no matter how hard she tried, Karen always seemed to find something to complain about. First, it was the color of Emily's mailbox, which Karen claimed clashed with the community aesthetic. Then, it was the ramp installed for Lily's wheelchair, a necessary modification that Karen argued disrupted the uniform appearance of the sidewalks. Each complaint felt like another weight on Emily's shoulders. Still, Emily refused to let Karen ruin their peace. After all, she had bigger battles to fight. Between her demanding job and caring for Lily, there wasn't much energy left for petty disputes. When Karen showed up at her door one afternoon, ranting about the height of her hedges, Emily simply nodded politely and promised to trim them later. Inside, though, she sighed deeply. It wasn't just the complaints that bothered her. It was the way Karen treated her family. Every time Karen looked at Lily's wheelchair, it was as if she saw not a child, but a violation of some invisible rulebook. Despite these tensions, Emily and Lily cherished their life in the suburbs. Their neighbors were kind, for the most part, and the community events brought everyone together. For Emily, the rhythm of her days was comforting. Early mornings spent getting Lily ready for school, long shifts at the hospital, and evenings filled with laughter and creativity. Even when exhaustion set in, she reminded herself why they lived here: to give Lily a safe, happy place to grow up. Yet beneath the surface, cracks were beginning to show. Karen's relentless criticism was wearing thin, and whispers of discontent spread among other residents who grew tired of her micromanaging ways. No one dared confront her directly, but behind closed doors, opinions varied. Some admired Karen's dedication to maintaining order, while others saw her as a bully who cared more about appearances than people. As autumn leaves began to fall, casting golden hues across the neighborhood, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that trouble loomed ahead. Little did she know, the calm would soon be shattered, and the consequences would test her strength, resilience, and humanity in ways she never imagined. The morning sun filtered through the curtains of Emily's kitchen, casting warm light over the countertops. After pulling a 24-hour shift at the hospital, a grueling marathon of surgeries and split-second decisions, Emily finally had a moment to breathe. Her body ached, her mind was foggy, but the sight of Lily sitting at the dining table with her paints brought an instant smile to her face. The little girl's wheelchair was parked nearby, and splashes of color dotted the paper in front of her. "Mommy, look," Lily said excitedly, holding up a painting of what appeared to be their backyard, complete with the swing set and flower beds. Emily walked over, kissed the top of her daughter's head, and praised her creativity. For a few precious minutes, the stress of work melted away. But reality came knocking sooner than she'd hoped. Outside, Karen Miller prowled the neighborhood like a hawk circling its prey. Her clipboard was tucked under one arm, and her lips were pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Today's target: Emily's garden hose, which coiled neatly against the side of the house, but happened to be bright green instead of the HOA-approved beige. Karen muttered under her breath about standards and uniformity, shaking her head as if the world were falling apart because of a hose. When Karen reached Emily's driveway, she stopped abruptly. There it was again, the wheelchair ramp, jutting out slightly beyond the edge of the sidewalk. It wasn't obstructing anything, nor did it pose any real danger. But to Karen, it was yet another reminder that perfection was slipping through her fingers. Determined to address the issue immediately, she marched up to the front door without hesitation. The sharp knock startled both Emily and Lily. Emily opened the door, still wearing her scrubs, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She blinked at Karen, trying to summon the energy for yet another conversation about rules she didn't care to break. Emily. Karen began without preamble. We need to talk about your ramp and your hose. You're violating multiple HOA guidelines. Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. Karen, I just got home from a 24-hour shift. Can this wait? But Karen wasn't interested in waiting. Her voice grew louder as she listed off infractions, each word laced with irritation. This isn't about you, Emily. It's about setting an example for the community. If everyone starts ignoring the rules, where does it end? Lily, sensing the tension, wheeled herself closer to her mother. She tugged gently on Emily's sleeve, whispering, "Mommy, I'm scared." Emily wrapped an arm around her protectively, her patience wearing thin. "I'll take care of it later, Karen," Emily said firmly. "Right now, my priority is my daughter." Karen scoffed, crossing her arms. "Your daughter is exactly why we have these rules. People notice things like ramps and hoses. They affect property values." Emily clenched her jaw, biting back a retort. Arguing wouldn't solve anything, and frankly, she didn't have the energy. Instead, she stepped aside, gesturing for Karen to leave. "I'll deal with this tomorrow. Goodbye, Karen." But Karen wasn't done. Without being invited, she pushed past Emily and entered the house, muttering something about needing to see the hose for herself. Emily followed, exasperated, as Karen strode into the kitchen. That's when everything changed. On the stove sat a pot of boiling water, left there briefly while Emily prepared lunch. In her anger and haste, Karen accidentally bumped into the counter. The pot wobbled, then tipped over, sending scalding water cascading onto the floor, and directly onto Lily, who had rolled closer to watch the commotion. Time seemed to freeze. For a split second, no one moved. Then Lily screamed, a piercing sound that shattered the silence. Emily sprang into action, her exhaustion forgotten. This wasn't just a mother reacting. It was a trauma surgeon using every ounce of training to save her child. The scream that tore through the kitchen was unlike anything Emily had ever heard, raw, primal, and heart-wrenching. It came from Lily, her sweet, innocent daughter, who now sat frozen in her wheelchair, her small hands clutching at her arms where the scalding water had spilled. Steam rose faintly from her skin, and red blotches began to form almost instantly. Emily's heart dropped into her stomach, but she didn't have time to panic. Years of working in emergency rooms had drilled one thing into her: when disaster strikes, you act. "Lily, sweetheart, look at me." Emily knelt beside her daughter, her voice firm yet soothing. Her training kicked in like second nature as she assessed the situation. The boiling water had soaked through Lily's sleeves, pooling against her delicate skin. Without hesitation, Emily grabbed a clean towel from the counter and began gently patting the affected areas to absorb the excess heat. "We need to cool this down," she muttered under her breath, more to herself than to anyone else. Karen stood rooted to the spot, her face pale and her eyes wide with horror. For once, her usual air of confidence was gone, replaced by sheer shock. She stammered something unintelligible, her clipboard clattering to the floor as she took a step back. But Emily didn't spare her a glance. Every ounce of focus was on Lily. "Mommy, it hurts," Lily cried, tears streaming down her face. Her voice trembled, and her tiny body shook uncontrollably. Emily's own heart felt like it might shatter, but she forced herself to stay calm for her daughter's sake. "I know, baby, I know," Emily whispered, her hands moving quickly. She turned on the faucet, letting cold water flow over a fresh towel. Wrapping it around Lily's arms, she pressed lightly, careful not to cause further damage. "This is going to help, okay? Just hold on." As she worked, Emily shouted toward Karen, who still hadn't moved, "Call 911. Now." Her tone left no room for argument. Karen fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking so badly she nearly dropped it twice before finally dialing. While waiting for paramedics, Emily kept talking to Lily, keeping her distracted. "Remember that painting you showed me earlier? The one with all the colors?" she asked softly, forcing a smile despite the chaos. "Tell me about it. What made you choose those colors?" Lily sniffled, trying to focus on her mother's words instead of the pain. "The yellow is for sunshine," she managed between sobs. "And blue is for the sky." "That's beautiful," Emily said, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's forehead. "You're so talented, my love." Minutes felt like hours as they waited for help to arrive. When the paramedics finally rushed in, their presence brought a sense of relief. Emily explained what had happened in precise medical terms, guiding them through her initial actions. They carefully transferred Lily onto a stretcher, wrapping her in sterile bandages and securing an IV line. Throughout it all, Emily stayed by her side, holding her hand tightly. Karen hovered nearby, wringing her hands and looking utterly lost. Several times, she opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came out. The weight of what she'd done hung heavy in the air. Finally, as the paramedics prepared to leave, she approached Emily hesitantly. I didn't mean for this to happen," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so sorry." Emily glanced at her briefly, her expression unreadable. There was no anger in her eyes, only exhaustion, and perhaps a flicker of pity. "Stay away from us right now," she said quietly, her tone cutting through the tension like a knife. Then, without another word, she climbed into the ambulance beside Lily, leaving Karen standing alone in the driveway. As the vehicle sped off, sirens wailing, Karen sank onto the curb, her head in her hands. The enormity of the situation crashed down on her like a tidal wave. She had always prided herself on being in control, on maintaining order, but now, for the first time, she realized how fragile that control truly was. And as neighbors began to gather, drawn by the commotion, whispers spread like wildfire. By nightfall, everyone would know exactly what had happened and whose fault it was. The hospital corridors were eerily familiar to Emily, but this time, they felt different. Usually, she walked these halls with purpose, her mind focused on saving lives, her scrubs stained with the evidence of battles fought and won. Today, however, she wasn't a doctor. She was a mother, watching helplessly as her own child lay in a sterile room, hooked up to machines that beeped steadily in the background. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unforgiving glow on the scene. Lily had been rushed into treatment immediately upon arrival. Burn specialists assessed her injuries, determining that the scalding water had caused second-degree burns on her arms and legs. While not life-threatening, the damage was significant enough to require careful medical attention. Emily stood by silently as her colleagues worked, their professionalism masking the personal connection she shared with the patient. She wanted to step in, to take over, but she knew better. Her emotions were too raw, her judgment clouded. Instead, she watched from the sidelines, gripping the edge of a chair until her knuckles turned white. Word spread quickly among the hospital staff about what had happened. Nurses whispered behind closed doors, doctors exchanged knowing glances, and even patients seemed to sense the gravity of the situation. Everyone knew Emily, not just as a brilliant trauma surgeon, but as a devoted mother who balanced her demanding career with raising a child with special needs. To see her now, pale and visibly shaken, tugged at the heartstrings of everyone who crossed her path. Karen's name became a quiet curse in the break room. Some nurses muttered about how that HOA woman had gone too far this time, while others speculated whether legal action would follow. A few even suggested organizing a fundraiser for Lily's recovery, though no one dared broach the topic directly with Emily. For now, she remained isolated in her grief, pacing outside Lily's room like a sentinel guarding her most precious treasure. Inside, Lily lay still, her face pale but peaceful. The pain medication had taken effect, and she slept fitfully, her small hands clutching the edges of the blanket. Emily sat beside her, holding one of those hands gently in hers. She traced the outline of Lily's fingers, memorizing every detail, as if afraid she might lose even this small connection. Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. Crying wouldn't help. Staying strong would. As the hours passed, Karen made several attempts to visit the hospital. Each time, she lingered nervously near the entrance, clutching a bouquet of flowers or a stuffed animal meant as a peace offering. But when she approached the nurse's station to ask about Lily's condition, she was met with icy stares and curt responses. "Dr. Carter doesn't want visitors," one nurse said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. Defeated, Karen retreated each time, retreating further into her guilt. Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, gossip rippled through the community like wildfire. Neighbors who had once tolerated Karen's micromanaging ways now openly criticized her behavior. At the grocery store, whispers followed her down the aisles. On social media, posts condemning her actions popped up under thinly veiled pseudonyms. Even the local coffee shop barista hesitated before serving her usual latte, his polite smile tinged with disapproval. For Karen, the weight of public opinion was crushing. She spent hours sitting alone in her living room, staring blankly at the walls. Memories of the accident replayed in her mind on an endless loop. The sound of the pot tipping, Lily's scream, Emily's steely glare. Sleep eluded her, and when it came, it was haunted by nightmares. She couldn't escape the image of Lily's tiny body trembling in pain, or the realization that her reckless obsession with rules had caused such devastation. Yet despite the growing storm around her, Emily remained focused solely on Lily's recovery. She fielded calls from concerned friends and neighbors, politely deflecting questions about Karen. When reporters began sniffing around, hoping to turn the story into sensational headlines, she shut them down immediately. This was her family's private battle, and she refused to let anyone exploit it for clicks or ratings. By the end of the day, the hospital staff had stabilized Lily, and the initial shock began to give way to a fragile sense of hope. As Emily leaned back in her chair, exhaustion finally overtaking her, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She thought about the irony of the situation, a trauma surgeon whose own daughter had become a victim of preventable harm. It was a cruel twist of fate, one that tested her faith in humanity, but also reinforced her determination to fight for justice, healing, and change. Days passed, and Lily's condition began to improve. The burns were painful but healing steadily under the care of the hospital staff. Emily stayed by her side as much as possible, juggling her responsibilities at work with late-night vigils in Lily's room. Though physically exhausted, she found strength in her daughter's resilience. Lily, despite everything, remained cheerful, finding joy in small moments, like when a nurse brought her favorite cartoon on a tablet or when her mom read her bedtime stories. But while Lily focused on recovery, Emily's mind was consumed by something else. Confronting Karen. She knew it wasn't just about the accident itself. It was about accountability, respect, and ensuring that nothing like this ever happened again. One evening, after tucking Lily into bed and making sure she was comfortable, Emily decided it was time. She called Karen and asked her to come to the house the next day. Her tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for negotiation. When Karen arrived, she looked like a shadow of her former self. Gone was the confident, rule-obsessed woman who once strutted through the neighborhood with a clipboard. In her place stood someone visibly broken. Her shoulders slumped, her eyes red from lack of sleep, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a notebook filled with hastily scribbled notes. She knocked softly on the door, almost afraid to enter. Emily greeted her without warmth. "Come in," she said simply, stepping aside. The air between them was thick with tension as they sat across from each other in the living room. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emily broke the silence. "You don't get to say you're sorry and think that fixes anything," she began, her voice steady but laced with quiet fury. "What happened to my daughter wasn't an accident. It was negligence. Your need to control every little detail blinded you to what really matters." Karen flinched at the words, tears welling up in her eyes. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I swear, I didn't think. I wasn't paying attention." "That's exactly the problem," Emily interrupted, leaning forward. "You weren't thinking. You barged into my home uninvited, ignored basic safety, and let your anger take over. Do you even realize how close we came to losing her?" The question hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Karen buried her face in her hands, sobbing openly now. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Please, tell me what I can do." Emily took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain composed. She had rehearsed this conversation in her mind countless times, but hearing Karen's raw vulnerability made it harder than she expected. Still, she pressed on. "First, you need to understand the impact of what you've done. Those burns aren't just physical. They're emotional scars that will stay with Lily for years. And then there's the toll it's taken on our family. The fear, the sleepless nights, the constant worry." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "Second, you need to step down as HOA president. This isn't about punishing you. It's about recognizing that your obsession with rules has gone too far. People are talking, Karen. They're angry, not just because of what happened to Lily, but because of how you've treated everyone in this neighborhood." Karen nodded vigorously, wiping her tears with trembling hands. "I'll resign immediately. I'll write a letter to the board tonight. Anything you want, I'll do." "Good," Emily said, though her expression remained guarded. "And lastly, you're going to cover all of Lily's medical expenses. Every doctor visit, every therapy session, every prescription, everything. No questions asked." Karen agreed without hesitation, pulling out her checkbook right then and there. But Emily stopped her. "Don't bother writing a check. We'll handle the details later. Right now, I want you to listen." For the next hour, Emily laid bare the emotional toll the incident had taken on their lives. She described the long shifts at the hospital where she couldn't stop picturing Lily screaming in pain. She talked about the guilt she felt for not being able to prevent the accident. And she explained how Lily's disability already made life challenging enough without adding unnecessary hardships caused by someone else's carelessness. By the end of the conversation, Karen was visibly shaken. She left the house promising to change, but Emily knew actions would speak louder than words. Forgiveness wouldn't come easily, and perhaps not at all. But one thing was certain: Karen would never forget the consequences of her actions. In the weeks that followed, Karen began to transform, not because she wanted redemption, but because she desperately needed it. The weight of what she'd done pressed down on her every waking moment, a constant reminder of how reckless and selfish she had been. She resigned from her position as HOA president, leaving behind the clipboard and rules that had once defined her life. For the first time in years, she found herself unsure of who she was or what purpose she served. But instead of retreating into isolation, she decided to channel her guilt into something meaningful. Karen started volunteering at a local charity for children with disabilities, hoping to make amends, not just to Emily and Lily, but to the broader community she had overlooked for so long. At first, the other volunteers eyed her warily, whispers trailing behind her like shadows. "Isn't that the woman who—" they murmured, their sentences trailing off as she approached. But Karen didn't let the judgment deter her. She showed up every day, eager to help, even if it meant starting small, organizing art supplies, setting up tables for events, or simply sitting quietly with kids who needed someone to listen. One afternoon, Karen met a young boy named Ethan, who used a wheelchair similar to Lily's. He was shy at first, hesitant to engage with anyone new. But Karen persisted, offering him snacks during breaks and asking about his favorite cartoons. Slowly, he began to open up, sharing stories about his dog and showing off drawings he'd made. When he smiled at her one day, a genuine, unguarded smile, it felt like a tiny crack of light breaking through the darkness she carried inside. For the first time since the accident, Karen allowed herself to feel hope. Meanwhile, back at home, Emily focused on helping Lily heal. Physical therapy sessions became part of their routine, with Lily working hard to regain strength and mobility in her arms and legs. Though the burns were healing well, the scars remained, a permanent reminder of the day everything changed. To distract herself, Lily threw herself into painting, creating vibrant works filled with bold colors and swirling patterns. One piece, titled Rainbow Hope, depicted a stormy sky giving way to sunshine over a field of flowers. When Emily saw it hanging proudly on the fridge, she felt a lump rise in her throat. Her daughter's resilience amazed her. Word of the incident spread beyond the neighborhood, sparking conversations about accessibility and inclusion in suburban communities. Inspired by these discussions, Emily agreed to speak at a local town hall meeting about the challenges families like hers faced. Standing before an audience of neighbors, city officials, and advocates, she shared her story with grace and determination. Accessibility isn't just about ramps or wider doorways, she said, her voice steady. It's about seeing people, their humanity, their worth, and making space for them in our lives. Her speech resonated deeply, prompting some residents to push for changes within the HOA guidelines. New proposals included more flexibility for modifications like wheelchair ramps and designated parking spaces for caregivers. Even those who had previously supported Karen's strict enforcement of rules now saw the value in prioritizing compassion over perfection. As the months passed, Karen continued to rebuild her reputation, earning back fragments of trust through consistent effort. She organized a neighborhood fundraiser to support disability awareness programs, inviting Emily and Lily to attend. Though Emily declined the invitation, she acknowledged Karen's progress privately, telling a friend, "She's trying, and that counts for something." By summer's end, the scars, both visible and invisible, began to fade, though they would never fully disappear. For Emily and Lily, life moved forward, shaped by resilience and love. And for Karen, the journey toward redemption became a lesson in humility, empathy, and the power of second chances. The neighborhood came alive on a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where golden sunlight filters through rustling leaves and laughter fills the air. It was the annual Fall Festival, an event meant to bring residents together for games, food, and camaraderie. This year, however, it felt different, more intentional, more hopeful. Gone were the rigid rules about booth decorations or exact placement of tables. Instead, banners celebrating diversity and inclusion lined the streets, welcoming everyone with open arms. Karen stood at the center of it all, clipboard long abandoned, wearing a bright apron that read Volunteer Extraordinaire. She had spent weeks helping organize the festival, working closely with Emily to ensure it was accessible for families like hers. Ramps were installed at every entrance, wide pathways accommodated wheelchairs, and quiet zones were set up for children who might feel overwhelmed by crowds. For Karen, this wasn't just another community event. It was a chance to prove she had changed, and to show the neighborhood what truly mattered. As families gathered around booths selling caramel apples and pumpkin pies, Karen took the stage alongside Emily, who had been invited to speak again. The crowd hushed as Emily stepped up to the microphone, holding Lily's hand tightly. Her voice rang out clear and strong, filled with gratitude and determination. "This community has taught me something powerful," she began, glancing at Karen briefly before addressing the audience. "It's shown me that when we choose kindness over judgment, understanding over criticism, and love over fear, we create a place where everyone belongs. Her words drew applause, but the real moment of impact came when Karen joined her on stage. Taking a deep breath, Karen faced the crowd, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the microphone. "I owe each of you an apology," she started, her voice wavering. "For too long, I let my obsession with rules overshadow what really matters: people. I hurt someone very special to this community, Lily, and for that, I will always be sorry." She paused, looking directly at Emily and Lily seated in the front row. "Thanks to Emily's strength and forgiveness, I've learned how to do better. I hope you'll give me the chance to keep proving myself, not just today, but every day moving forward." The crowd erupted into applause, some wiping away tears while others cheered loudly. Children waved glow sticks in the air, their excitement mirroring the renewed spirit of the neighborhood. As Karen stepped down from the stage, several neighbors approached her, offering hugs and words of encouragement. It wasn't full forgiveness. Trust took time, but it was a start. Later that evening, as lanterns lit up the park and music played softly in the background, Emily watched Lily laugh as she painted tiny pumpkins at a craft station. Nearby, Karen knelt beside Ethan, the boy she befriended at the charity, helping him string beads onto a bracelet. Watching them interact brought a small smile to Emily's face. Progress wasn't perfect, but it was progress nonetheless. That night, as Emily tucked Lily into bed, she reflected on how far they'd come since that fateful day. Life would never be without its challenges, especially for a family navigating disability in a world not always designed for them. But resilience had become their anchor, and love their guiding light. As she turned off the lamp and closed Lily's bedroom door, Emily whispered a silent thank you for her daughter's courage, for the lessons learned, and for the reminder that even in the darkest moments, communities could grow stronger together. Outside, the stars twinkled brightly, casting a gentle glow over Maple Lane, a street forever changed, but now brimming with hope.